authoritarian government, there is a power and authority higher than you. Our calling is not first to comply with your laws. We must obey God rather than men.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This is the live Q&A with Sean Kaufman about the film The Essential Church. You just watched one of our newest teasers that we were really excited about, and I am going to introduce to you Sean Kaufman. He's in our documentary. He's a public health official, has mass amount of experience, and I can't see him yet, but is he going to show up on the screen? There he is. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing great, Shannon. How are you? It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well. It's been a little bit since I trekked out to Atlanta into your underground lab.
I got to give a shout out. You actually came to Woodstock, Georgia. And so I know there's a lot of folks here in the Woodstock, Cherokee County area that are watching, that are fans. We've got it playing here in the Regal Cinema here in Woodstock, Georgia. We've been pushing them. A shout out to Jim McClure. I know he's listening, and his family, Marcia. And I'll tell you this, a lot of folks are very excited here in Georgia to see this movie. So thank you, not only for coming out and seeing us, but for really telling this story.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your part in the story. You know, it's a theological story, very much so. Yeah. Oh, we gotta. I'm.
Are you hearing something in the background?
Yeah, I am. But oh well, I'll try to ignore it. Okay. So basically, yeah, it is, but I'm going to try to ignore it. We'll try to push through these technical difficulties, folks. Bear with us.
This one we thought we handled them. It looks like there's more.
Thought we had it. Okay, so I just want to ask you a question. I'll get right into it.
Yeah.
How would you explain your evolution in understanding your view and what happened during 2020 till now? Because you started in one place and then you ended up in another. And, you know, I think you probably would have said you were somebody who really trusted the system before. And I'm sure you've learned through this process and have maybe a different view. Could you share with us about that?
Yeah, sure. So prior to what happened in 2020, I'm going to refer to it as the vid. The reality is that I have served public health for 25 years, and I'm a proud public health professional. I really am. Although what has recently happened is one of those things that has been a huge challenge to me personally. Prior to what happened in 2020, public health had a process. It had a way of doing things. And primarily, public health served everyone. What I mean by that is it was a voice for everyone. It wasn't a voice for politics. It wasn't a voice for healthcare doctrines. It wasn't a voice, for big pharma. It was a voice for the general public, the people that we served. And so, in 2020 and beyond, we started seeing prescriptions or prescribed demands or mandates. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, and I'm sure people are as well. But we started seeing these prescribed mandates that were universal, even though the risk to this particular condition or challenge was not universal. And so very, very disappointing in not only what we saw from a preventative and trying to take care of people, but what we saw for controlling and mitigating the overall risk in a scientific manner.
Awesome. So I'm just going to look to my technical crew right for a minute. Thank you for that answer. Hold on one second.
No problem.
So I think you have to.
I don't know if everybody can see me, but if everybody can see me, hello. to numb myself out a little bit.
We're going to try a different method here and see if that fixes the issue. Having a little sound problem. Sean, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I took my earbuds out. I'm just gonna do this, and it's gonna work somehow.
There'll be a little delay.
So you were talking about your evolution
Yeah.
from point A to point B, and I actually didn't hear any of it. So maybe you could summarize again, just real quickly. Where were you before, and where did you end up? Before, were you? I remember talking. You were very much a Fauci fan. Would you say?
Yeah.
Back
absolutely.
in the day.
Yeah. I look again.
So, tell us about that. Yeah.
Yeah. For serving public health for over 25 years, and I've been truly blessed. I started in the wonderful state of California during the HIV/AIDS days, and serving those who literally had their lives destroyed as a result of a virus. And then moving to CDC and working at CDC for over 7 years, and then at Emory University, School of Public Health for 10 years, and even being funded by NIAID, which is where Dr. Fauci was at that time. I really have been blessed through my career of public health to serve many people who have been in need. And I'm a big fan of public health. I always have been. But in 2020, things changed. Public health, I think, overstepped its mission. It forgot about the people without a voice, or the ones that would certainly not appeal to a prescribed strategy that was universal. And in my opinion, it didn't really use a lot of science to back up its universal mandates for a variety of things. So it's neat. I've had a now 27-year ride in public health, and for 25 of those years, it's been one heck of a great ride. Full of blessings and full of being able to serve people and be with those who are hurting and in desperate need of information and care, so to speak.
Fantastic. So when you first heard about the churches shutting down, what was going on in your mind when they were saying the churches need to shut down? When you first started to hear that, what were your thoughts?
To be honest with you, I was devastated. When we learn about public health is not just about the avoidance of infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are out there. We've got influenza that was a seasonal threat. We've got measles. We've got infectious diseases literally around the world that pose a constant threat to people every single day. And the risks associated with chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, lack of the ability to exercise, depression, anxiety, suicide, addiction. These are all public health threats that are very, very serious. And these are public health threats that, in essence, church, a sense of belongingness, a sense of connection to community. These help individuals that are fighting these conditions that lead inevitably to a sense of unhealthiness and a sense of death and disease. And so when church was taken away and closed, yet other businesses that promoted unhealthy behaviors were remained open and deemed essential. I couldn't find a better name for this movie than what you've named it, because the church is absolutely critically essential to the health and well-being of many people, not only in the United States, but globally and around the world.
Yeah. Did your value of church increase as a result of this thing that happened to us during 2020, where we had those lockdowns? Was there what was your emotion before and after towards the church and how you saw it?
So I'm a big believer right now in trying to minimize division and minimize pain. We've had a lot of people suffer, and for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people couldn't get good information. A lot of people had to make information or make decisions on incomplete information, and so your question stirs up a bit of conflict in me, and I'll be honest, I'm just going to be very direct. Locally, I attended a church that decided to close. It had massive parking lots. It had lots of space. And even though there were online services, so it's not fair to say it was a completely closed event, it was very disappointing to me because I felt as though something that, again, when we look at the science of this disease, and this is very, very important to point out, it wasn't universal. The risk was never universal. Science never backed a universal approach or universal mandate for this. We had a novel virus. We knew it was novel. We knew a lot of people would get sick, but we also knew that the sickest of the sickest, or the people who were the oldest and had weakened immune systems, were always going to be the most vulnerable, but it wasn't going to universally apply to everyone. And the reality is that when you make these massive universal mandates, that's where public health, I think, made a huge mistake. But when we go even further, and this is where it gets worse, when you start dictating what is essential and what is not essential, and the churches were not deemed essential, that sense of connection, that sense of belongingness, that's where, again, it started to break my heart. I hoped that our church would be one that was open and would promote in-person community if people so choose to. Again, that's their choice, but that choice was removed with the closure of the church.
Yeah. You know, the reason we learned about you is because you were one of the experts that were speaking to our court case. And our lawyers were going out and finding public health officials with massive amounts of experience like you have to bring reason and real science to the argument of whether or not the churches actually should be closing down or not. You know, why do you think, you know, there's some people that say, you know, the credentials don't matter or things like that. But why do you know, if somebody were to say, you know, Sean, I don't think you're an expert on this, what would you tell them to correct them on that?
Well, you know, Shannon, unfortunately, today there is no debate. Because if there was a debate, I would very much love, if Dr. Fauci's out there, I'd love to talk to Dr. Fauci one day and have a public debate. I know a lot of people that are a lot smarter than I am, and I know a lot of people that are more academically prepared than I am. But what I do not know is why individuals that are academically prepared and are considered to be the experts, who were wrong majority of the time in COVID, and now we're starting to see that, why they don't have good, healthy scientific debates. There's a lot of questions that leaders need to answer. That didn't make sense from the very beginning. And so the reality is that I would very much love an open discussion, a debate, and not name calling or avoidance of discussions. But you know, to me, it's been a very frustrating road because usually in science we talk, we discuss, we have conversations. We don't ignore people who are hurting. We don't ignore people who are suffering. We don't ignore observations that we make. We learn, we listen, and we do our best to serve. And that's just not something that we saw in this event.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, as I was saying earlier, this film is a theological story. It's a story about the church. The church is the protagonist, and its goal is to basically just be the church and not compromise the headship of Christ. And there's a struggle throughout, a struggle for that, to be able to accomplish that. But one of the sections in the documentary is where I address the gathering of the church. And I remember I was, just for fun, I went to like Yelp on our church. The church is Grace Community Church, if those who are watching don't know. Grace Community Church in the Valley, where John MacArthur is the pastor. And I was looking up reviews of what people said about the church, and one of the reviews was, they don't love their neighbor, because they gathered together, which basically killed people. And I have to address that in the documentary in a variety of ways, but one is just the objective reality of whether or not that's actually true, that gathering together, we killed grandma. And so what is your answer? What would you tell that person, that Yelp reviewer who says, you don't love your neighbor because you gathered together, because gathering together was the enemy?
I think that there's really, folks are going to have their opinions. And to me, Shannon, that sounds like it's a judgment. And I've always believed that if you've been judged by others, wait patiently for Christ to do what is right. And if you've judged others, seek to be forgiven. I think that many people formed opinions, and this was the grossest abuse of power in history, in my opinion. And the reason why is that people cannot make informed decisions if information is censored. And the problem that we faced was public health professionals and experts like myself that had opposing views. We were banned from Twitter. We were banned from LinkedIn. We were banned from any mainstream media outlet. And so when you have neighbors, in my opinion, that come to you and they say these things that sometimes don't make sense or don't have much science behind them, I have to forgive them because I'm looking at someone who really truly is running off of incomplete information. And anytime a neighbor wants to come up and talk, I'm coming out to see you, Shannon. I look forward to seeing you here real soon. But if you wanted to host a discussion where we can answer questions scientifically, we'll talk about the science. But a lot of people have formed opinions on very incomplete information. They've been misled. And that's been a tragedy all along in this event.
Yeah. That part, one of the parts was with you and Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya, and they speak to that, and you gave a lot of insight into like the reality of the value of coming together and gathering together, and how really the lockdowns were destroying people, like we said, with anxiety and depression and suicide skyrocketing and things like that. But I often ask myself, like, well, what if all of the statistics were true? The statistics we were told at the beginning. Like, they gave a statistic that it was 3.4% were dying from this, and that was inaccurate. And they never corrected themselves publicly. They actually knew it was inaccurate, and they just never brought it up again. And so everybody was going off of that previous information for the rest of the year. And maybe still are, honestly. And that's the way the news media works, unfortunately. They create a narrative, and even when they find out it's wrong, they don't necessarily go back and correct it, and they just kind of ride with it. And I'm sure they have their reasons for doing that. But, hypothetically, if the statistics were correct, the reality of what we did is what we said is the church is going to be open, but we're not telling anybody they have to come. And we're not forcing anybody to come. And we're not forcing anybody to wear or not wear a mask. We're not forcing you not to gather, to not social distance. We provided a tent outside. We provided all sorts of overflow. We had hand sanitizer. And we didn't tell anybody they had to come. We just said the church should be open. And we're not going to close down. And those individuals can make a decision that's best for them to come to church or to stay home, or however they want to come to church. And I just think that seems so reasonable to me, but nobody was really seeing it that way. What are your thoughts on that and that approach?
Well, I sponsor or not sponsor. I work. My expertise is working with scientists and healthcare providers who work with very, very dangerous pathogens. We're not talking about pathogens that kill less than 1% of the people they infect. We're talking about pathogens that kill 50, 60, 70, 80% of the people they infect. And we can do that very, very safely. This threat that we encountered was not a universal threat. There were precautions that could have been taken to protect the health and safety of individuals while they choose to worship or gather in a community-based church. Look, I also, my core belief is that love or God cares more, in essence, about who's hurting than who's watching. And that's a main theme for me. And the reason why is the story of Jesus walking in on the Sabbath at least 7 times to heal people. What matters to me the most is that Jesus, the sentence was death back then if you worked on the Sabbath. And Jesus didn't care about what people thought. What Jesus did was what was right, and to keep churches open so that people who need them have access to them. We're not talking about need them because it's a want. We're talking about people not who only want, but they need. It's part of their soul, of their body, to take that away, to close churches down. Really, again, I think was a big mistake. As I did in my testimony, as I said in my testimony, there were definitely public health options and strategies that could have been done and implemented to ensure that safe gathering could have very easily taken place.
Yeah. So now that time has gone on, how has time vindicated your view and stance on what happened in 2020?
Oh God, it's a great question. Vindication. I used to seek it, and then I decided maybe I won't seek vindication. Maybe just healing. You know who John Witherspoon is?
Say that again?
You know who John Witherspoon is? Goes all the way back to the signing of the
Oh,
Declaration
sure. Yeah.
He's the only cleric who signed the Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. He's the only religious guy. And well, I mean, all of them were religious, but he's the only cleric. But he had a quote, and his quote was, "It's only the fear of God that can deliver us from the fear of man." I stand today, even as I'm listening to this or doing this with you, Shannon, and who knows who's watching this, because I tried to market as much as I could. But I stand in fear of judgment. There are many professionals out there that still believe that everything they said and did is right. Even as new information comes out, even as we learn more and more about what has happened, they're holding steadfast and they're stubborn to their point of views, and they are against everything that we're talking about right now. And that type of judgment is something that I fear because, well, it could hurt me, but, and this is huge, God gave me 27 years of experience, and in my heart and in my soul, I know what I experienced is real and true. And so my fear of not sharing that experience and that expertise with the world and with people, my fear of not doing that, not using the blessing that God had given me, is far greater than what man can do to hurt me. And so I think if I go back to John Witherspoon, where they risked their lives to sign a Declaration of Independence for this country, I feel that, look, I can't waste this opportunity to glorify God and the blessings that God has given me. And so I can't sit back and be quiet.
Yeah. So going forward, how do you see healthcare actually caring for the general population in a pandemic situation?
Well, I hope.
Going forward, how should we go about it?
Yeah, I hope that healthcare made a huge mistake. Public health made a huge mistake. So, for example, if we respond to Ebola in another country like we have, and we do, or cholera, or any type of epidemic or outbreak, the very first thing we do is we set up treatment centers. And those treatment centers keep people away from hospitals. And the reason why that's so important is because hospitals are where people go to deliver babies, and they go to have life-saving surgeries. And why we ever would have told people who are feverish or symptomatic to go to hospitals where other people are looking for life-saving care was one of the biggest public health mistakes. And it didn't make any sense. It never did, because if you go internationally, it's the first thing we do. We keep the hospitals, we protect the hospitals. We have treatment centers for people we think are sick with whatever's occurring in the environment, and we separate it and we protect our assets accordingly. And that didn't happen here. There were a lot of big mistakes like that that just it didn't make sense, to be honest with you, Shannon.
Yeah. Here's a question one of our viewers put forward, and they said, how do we address the widespread apathy in many Christians not those who have abandoned their faith for the extreme left wing, but those who don't know how to respond to the chaos around them from the left and from the right.
Oh,
I have
what a
thoughts
great,
on that,
yeah,
but I'll let you go first.
what a great question. I'm hoping your movie sparks something. I'm hoping this movie sparks. Listen, I love this shirt. I've got my, I love what you guys did here. And they're trying to capture corner Jesus, and they want him to say so desperately to go against Caesar, and he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." And you do not belong to the government. You belong to God, and remember that forever and ever and ever. And remember, you have one boss. You don't work for people. You work with them, and they may call themselves your boss, but don't ever believe you're owned by anyone but God. That's it. And I think that I wish that message, Shannon, comes through to your movie. That's why I'm promoting your movie. I want Christians to wake up and say, listen, if you're going to be enslaved to anything or anyone, it should not be on this earth. It should be to God and only God. And listen to what God says, because God does speak. He speaks to all of us, and it isn't out of fear. It isn't judgment. It isn't resentment. It isn't hatred. It's love. It's acceptance. It's peace. And everybody has a contribution to make. So I think, my opinion on that is I'm hoping that your movie sparks the courage in all who go to church, and certainly within the Christian population, to remember and to remind people that, we do hear and live peacefully within governments, but we belong to God and God alone. So.
Yeah, that's a great answer. The documentary is dealing with the church, and I look at it in three elements, really. The church from in the past, church history, and then we have our present local church and our story, and then we have this global story, and we see that in our Canadian friends. And through that, the common theme is that from the past to the present, locally to globally, we're holding the ground of who is the head of the church, and it's Christ. And he's spoken to us in his word, excuse me. The only way we have unity in the church is if we return to that truth and unify around that truth. We're united because we'll all believe in the truth that Jesus is God the Son, that he did come to the earth, that he received the punishment that sinners deserve, and that everybody who repents, meaning they turn from their sin and to Christ, then turn to Christ, are atoned for, and that he pays for their sin, and that this is the gospel, and that he rose from the dead, and that he is the first fruits of that, and that we too will rise from the dead and be with him forever.
Amen.
And that's the ultimate truth. That's the transcendent truth. And the government was sanctioned, given to us by God. There is an authority in government, and the government, its authority is to punish evil and reward good. But it was never, ever to take any kind of stand within the jurisdiction of the church. And that's something that this documentary shows, is that there really is these three spheres of life that the Lord has given us, and it's family, church, and government. And these three spheres of authority don't have authority over each other. They're all coordinate to one another, but directly answer to God. And we get into that in the documentary. So, we don't have unity unless we know and believe the truth and hold to it. We're not going to have unity by nice feelings or any of that other stuff. It's going to be from the truth. So find a biblical church, go to it that teaches the Bible, and love one another. So, all right, we have any other questions here coming up?
I see some questions. Yeah, I see some questions. Well, you go ahead, Shannon. You're leading.
I can't see those. Yeah, so if you can read them, because my monitor is so tiny, there's no way I can read them. So if you want to read one of those questions, go for it.
Thank you for the questions. And it says, Sean, what are some of those alternate steps you would have implemented if you were head of CDC? Well, first, I would have kept the sick away from hospitals. We needed people to have the surgeries they needed. We needed the babies born. We needed dads to be in the rooms with the moms delivering babies, because the greatest memory of my life is the first time I ever saw all my children born. I'll never forget those moments. And those moments were stripped from people because of this. I think that what we could have done is we could have been very open to alternative treatment aspects. I've never in my life of public health ever seen a doctor throw their hands up and say, well, I can't give you this because somebody else says this. I am a public health professional. I've worked in Africa and I've taken prophylactic countermeasures for malaria. That includes ivermectin and hydrochloroquine for years. It was always safe. So why we wouldn't have used medications and repurposed medications for the treatment, even if it didn't matter, it could have at least tried to save lives a lot better and a lot more than it did. And again, data is coming out that demonstrates that maybe there were benefits in those areas. Look, there are so many other public health recommendations I would have made. I would have believed a lot more in natural immunity. In fact, CDC still to this day says that if you've had measles or you've had chickenpox or you've had other viruses, that there is no need to get vaccinated or injected again because you have natural immunity. And there was no given credit to natural immunity during this event as well. So I would have made some drastic changes. And one of the biggest ones is if I was the director of CDC, I would actually have been in Atlanta at the CDC and not remote. And that's a huge issue as well. So I would have brought politics out. I would have thrown healthcare doctrines away, and I would have certainly not promoted big pharma as the only way of serving people. So I would have steered clear. I would have represented the general public. I would have served everyone in the general public, those who were afraid and those who were not afraid. Everyone would have been served. It wouldn't have been just a single part of the audience. That was a great question. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. DJ, I was 5 years. I was 5 years at CDC. I'm seeing questions come in, Shannon. I don't know if you want me to keep going or
do it. You go for it. This is great. I love it.
DJ, I was at CDC for 5 years as an employee, and then 2 years as a guest researcher, and then 10 years at Emory University School of Public Health, and then I've been in private business since 2014 during the Ebola outbreak. So we transitioned out of Emory and went into kind of a consulting company and are doing our own work on our own. So good question, DJ. I appreciate it. Yeah, and my wife is in the room reminding me that we do this all over the world. So she's like, so thank you, DJ, for your question. I appreciate it. I don't know if there are any other questions that will pop up, or Shannon, if you wanted to say anything.
There's another one. I have another question here. I think I asked this question. How do you address the widespread apathy in many Christians? Yeah, I already asked that.
Yeah. Well, DJ
so
go ahead.
No, I can't see the question, so if you see them, if there's another question you want to answer, go for it. If you can be the editor. Absolutely. You don't have to answer what you don't want to answer.
No, this is all great. I love DJ's question.
Okay.
The first thing, DJ, that CDC can do to regain public trust is admit where they were wrong. That's the first thing that they could do. And I have to be fair. Listen, CDC is full of exceptional individuals. And I know many, many individuals within CDC. The leadership and what was publicized in the general public or covered in the mainstream media, there were a lot of errors. And trust me, I have a lot of great individuals that work at CDC that lifted me up when I felt beat up, that reminded me that it was important for me to continue to communicate because we were in direct contrast at times. But I think CDC, first and foremost, would have to say, we could have done better. And this is how we could have done better. And in the future, this is how we will do better. And I think that would be the first step in how CDC can regain public trust.
Yeah. Do you think they'll ever regain the trust?
I do, Shannon. And the reason why I do is I think that we have a very forgiving, community and even forgiving people. I don't think they want to remember the mess ups that people have made, but I think it's important to separate CDC leadership from CDC employees. The workforce of CDC and even other government officials like the FBI, and we can go on and on. The workforce is very different than the leadership. Leadership is politically appointed, and therefore they follow political narratives over the health and safety of people. And so when you look at the people that are doing the work, they're good people. They're saving lives and they're making a difference. It's the leadership that is making gross errors, because instead of being driven by need and by care, they're being driven by politics and narratives and big pharma and healthcare doctrines and lobbying and all of these things that, in my opinion, it's not where God lives. It's not where Christ lives. It's misleading, and it's causing a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering. So I did see a question from Lee Middles. It says, how are we supposed to trust government, churches, and doctors when they failed us through the pandemic? Wow, that's tough. That's a tough question. So again, what I'm going to ask for is a sense of forgiveness, and here's how I'm living with it. So I used to get very angry, and I had resentment, a lot of it, but then I realized something. Only half of the story ever got told. And Lee Middles, I know that you know that there are some people that have access to experts in this industry, in this world. And those individuals were able to listen and judge the people they trust the most, their family members. But not everybody had access to that. They had limited information, and they were believing what they had always been told to believe, which was the CDC or the political people that they trust. And when only half the story can be trusted, only half the story could ever be told, that's going to be the biggest you watch. Court cases are going to come because only half the story was told to the people. People made decisions about their lives, about going to church, about getting a injection, about wearing a mask. They made those decisions based on half of the information that was available. And when you do that, you can't blame them. So I'm not going to say that government, churches, and doctors let people down. I'm going to say that whoever censored people and prevented good, sound information from being tapped into by people, those are the individuals that we really need to take a look at and to make sure that censorship doesn't ever happen again.
Yeah. There we go. Who appointed Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, Dr. Fauci's he's a legacy. He's been through multiple presidencies. He's a legacy, and really was untouchable prior to this event. He's recognized for look. A lot of people want to jump on the bandwagon and say that someone is all good or all bad. Look, I can tell you that Dr. Fauci has done a tremendous amount for science over his whole lifetime of work. I am no longer a fan. Don't get me wrong. I feel like what has happened during the event has been very hurtful. And I do believe Dr. Fauci could have done better, but I am not going to tell you that Dr. Fauci is all bad, because he's had some good times. He's had some good moments. And I can remember in Ebola, he's had good moments. I can remember in HIV. Even though there were a lot of controversial aspects of HIV, he was the one that said HIV should not be a political matter, that it should be a human matter. There are a lot of things that he did well, but there are some things he made gross mistakes and gross errors on. And I think time is going to tell. And ladies and gentlemen, as a Christian, it's not my job to judge. He will receive his judgment duly and fairly by our God. And so I just am going to try to speak the truth, which is, he's done some great things, and I think he's made some mistakes, and that's the truth from my point of view.
Are politics still involved in how the CDC operates?
100%, yes. If you really want to prevent what's happened during this past event, it's not just CDC. It's FDA. It's NIH. Look, and what I mean by that, again, please hear me loud and clear. The people that serve these agencies, I know many of them, they're just phenomenally well academically trained. They're brilliant, they're bright, they're awesome. It isn't the workforce, it's leadership. And when you look at leadership, and sometimes the top echelon of leaders, it's not even mid leaders, it's just the top echelon who are political appointed. They go along with more politics than care. And that's skewed. And again, I don't mean to offend people. I just am telling you straight out that when you allow those positions to be political appointees, you're going to run into bias. And when you run into bias, it usually is going to be leaning towards whichever political party is in power. And that's, the captain of the ship navigates and points the ship in the direction, and the workforce works. So, the person down in the boiler rooms of a steam ship doesn't know where we're going, but they work just as hard, and they're competent, they're extremely good, but it's the captain that's driving the ship. And so if the captain is biased in one way or another, then the ship goes in the direction that the captain chooses.
Yeah. I know one thing that I've really meditated on a lot through just preparing for this film, researching it, and making the film is we need to see everything with spiritual eyes, if you will, and use spiritual discernment. And that I think one thing that Christians before what happened to us in 2020 probably saw government and maybe even politics to some degree as neutral ground, but not spiritual warfare. And we have to understand that there are worldviews at play here, and there are leaders who have worldviews who are antithetical to what the Bible says. We have a lot of leaders like that. And, we need to use discernment when understanding policies or the things that they are saying and what they are leading with. And we can do that if we know the Bible well, if we know God's Word. The more we know the Lord, the better discerning we're going to be. And we need to understand that the whole world lies in the lap of Satan. It's not just certain parts of it. It's all of it, and especially government. So Christians should not look at the government as neutral, and they should always see it as spiritual warfare. And that doesn't mean everything that comes out of the government is bad, but you just have to be discerning and not... we need to exercise that muscle, and I think that's something that this movie wants to do. It wants Christians to exercise that muscle. It also brings the gospel publicly to people. So if you know people who don't know the Lord, they will hear the gospel in this documentary, and it's told well through our interviewees, and it's I think really compelling. So it's a great ministry opportunity to bring friends and family who don't know the Lord, and to bring people who are on the fence about this and didn't really know what they thought about this or completely disagreed. I think it would be a good challenging movie for that. So the movie comes out July 28th, and we just added another 70 theaters or something like that, and we're going to be adding them all week. Our goal is to get up to 1,000. We'll see if we get that, but right now we have 170. We just signed with AMC, and before that we're in Regal and we're in Cinemark. So if you would have told me we would have been showing this film in those theaters across the U.S. even 4 months ago, I would have said, no, that's probably not going to happen. That would be nice, though. But it's actually happening, so it's a big deal, and we're trying to get the word out. So tell all your friends and family. It's a great ministry opportunity. And thank you so much, Sean, for coming on and talking with us and taking on questions. And really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to seeing you this coming weekend. You're going to visit our church, and you're going to spend Sunday with us. We're doing a little premiere at Grace Community Church on July 23rd. It opens everywhere July 28th, but you got to have a little premiere. So we're going to have that, and you're going to get to meet Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya if you haven't already met those guys, and we're all going to have dinner together, and it's going to be a blast. So I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. I look forward to seeing you again, Shannon, and being out there in California. So. Okay,
great. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you soon. And if you haven't signed up at essentialchurchmovie.com, please do, and put your email in there and subscribe, and you'll get all the updates of everything that unfolds for the Essential Church. Thanks again, and good night.
So we are beginning to see persecution from government. This is the most formidable persecution. Nothing new. 1660, the Covenanters signed their national covenant with their blood to resist to the death the claims of the king, to override the crown rights of the Redeemer in his church, King Jesus.
The government wanted to impress on people, look what happens. Brown was betrayed. Margaret Wilson and her younger sister Agnes, they were known to be covenanting sympathisers. Difficult to know how many were actually executed. Why would you die for church polity?